fast growing, resilient. These are three words I would use to describe philodendron. But are your philodendron not one of those three things? I'm here to help you out. My name is Stephanie, I live in Canada, and I love growing houseplants on a budget. In today's video, I'll be sharing my philodendron collection, but not just giving you a tour. I'm also going to share some of my top tips on how I care for each one of the philodendron in my collection. Honestly, I do not have a massive philodendron collection. I focus on being more deliberate about the plants I brought into my collection instead of just collecting all of the pretty plants. So in today's video, I'm going to give you a tour of, I think it's 11 philodendron. I just got one a few days ago, so stay tuned if you'd like to see that. I usually rank my plants, but I've decided to go from my biggest philodendron to my smallest one. All day we had literally a snowstorm. We had probably snow almost up to my knee, and I'm very grateful that now that I've decided to film, we've got a little bit of sunshine. Probably the biggest one in many people's collections is this one. This is my Philodendron Selloum, and I know it's a beast. It's a massive plant. This is probably the easiest philodendron in my entire collection. The easiest. Seriously, this plant lives outside in the summertime, and funny enough, during the summer it is a lot more compact, but now that it's winter, now that we have fewer hours of light and I need to bring it indoors, even if it's resting right against this south-facing window, it still grows these extremely long petioles, trying to reach for the light. Anyways, this philodendron is a very common and usually quite easy to find in lots of places. It's known for its long lobe-like leaves, and I don't think it's actually a philodendron. It's actually, I think it's a Thaumatophyllum. We'll just group it into a philodendron for today because I think most people know it as a philodendron. It has these gigantic finger-like leaves, and they're a little bit wavy. They remind me of fern a little bit. Whoops, I'm breaking the pot with all of the weight. This plant is super easy to grow and extremely resilient, and you'll find me saying this for a lot of philodendron. What I do almost every single year that I have this plant, when it gets to spring, I most times will give it a buzz cut to get rid of all of these really long petioles. And right when the weather is nice and warm enough to put plants outside, I will put this out and let it live there until fall, right before it starts to freeze. But this philodendron is so easy to care for. It is also quite thirsty, and that's something I've learned about philodendron. They are quite thirsty, and this plant, if you let it dry out too much, you will get a little bit of crispiness on the leaves. This plant is a spider mite magnet. It attracts pests very easily because it has these very delicate, very thin leaves that I guess they find quite juicy. I would say you need to regularly check on this plant for pests. Although it's in my south-facing window, if you've seen my low light video, you know that right now I don't have a lot of direct sunlight except for now, which is fine because this evening sun will not last very long and it's not intense or harsh. It's just fine getting this light. But during the summertime, I definitely would not put this or any philodendron into direct sunlight. A lot of them tend to have these very thin leaves and they burn quite easily. So that's tip number one. Remember this spot? We were here while I was filming my low light hanging plants video. Check that out if you haven't done so already. We're going to talk about this plant again because it is a philodendron and it is part of my collection, and that is my Philodendron Brazil. This plant, when I got it, it wasn't even trailing as yet. It was literally maybe this big, if so much. It was tiny, like really tiny. It was growing in soil, and I got it during a time when I wanted to try growing a lot of my plants into water. And I think I've said this story before. I went and I took it out of soil and I put it into water, and then I put it in a low light situation under a grow light. But at the time, I wasn't thinking about distance between the grow light and the plant. I was just like, I'm just gonna stick it over here in this corner. And no, the plant quickly started dropping leaves and losing leaves. So what have I learned about this plant? Not one that I would advise people to try to grow in water. It's definitely not one of my water plants. You maybe could get it done, but it will need to be blasted with light in order to survive well this way. Finicky is a strong word because when I think of finicky, I think of a Hoya huskilliana when it's a baby. Ooh, maybe this one, maybe the alocasia, they say it's not a frydek, but the alocasia, maybe when we think of finicky, that's what I think of. This plant is just not as easy when it's juvenile than your other philodendron, especially the lemon lime. Oh my goodness, this is definitely not as easy as the lemon lime. But then I just decided, you know what, stop trying to get fancy, put it back into soil and stick it in a bright area. So this is definitely one of those very thirsty philodendron, not one that I would even stick into an aeroid mix. Like, no way, this needs hydration. This needs a very water retentive mix. I have underwatered this plant way more than I've ever overwatered it. I don't think I have a memory of ever overwatering this plant because it will take whatever you can give it. At the same time, now that it's established, I significantly underwater this plant so much and I never lose leaves for it. It just begins to look a little bit droopy. The leaves just look slightly wrinkled, and I think because, you know, we have a little bit of a relationship, I can sort of catch that when it's getting a little bit, you know, when it's not, you know, when I don't like letting plants get to the point where they're droopy in order to water them, because that could cause them to go into shock. Definitely a plant, if you're living in a lower light area, like I mentioned in that video, you want to put it next to grow lights. It doesn't need intense grow lights. Like I mentioned, these leaves will burn, but it needs consistent light in order to be able to use up the possible overwatering that you may do every once in a while. But yeah, it's a wonderful plant. It's actually fast growing. I do think it is. I looked at a picture of this a few months ago, not even that long ago, and I couldn't believe how much smaller it was compared to how it looks now. And I think it's growing a little bit faster now because I've been watering it a little bit more. To propagate, just like all the others, I cut it right here. Again, philodendron tend to have these adventitious roots, these roots that stick out at the nodes here, right? And so what I do is I just cut it and stick it back in. And I guess that's what makes mine a little bit more thirsty, because I try to have lots of plants growing in here to give it a nice full look. But I just have everything trail on one side just because of that's where my grow lights face. And again, I have grow lights in the ceiling that face the plant. It's all detailed out in my low light hanging plants video. It's the last time you'll see it for a long time, I promise. But there's this one. It's a philodendron, so I have to add it. If I didn't add it, you'll be like, Stephanie, where's your Jose Buono? I won't say too much, I promise. But again, this is my philodendron Jose Buono. I got it when it was maybe just about 4 leaves or so. This is one of the fastest growing houseplants in my collections and one of my favorite houseplants for the year of 2024. It's in that video. I put it on this moss pole less than a month ago. I posted the video of when I put it on a moss pole, yeah, maybe 3 weeks ago, and we already have a root in here, in the moss pole, right here. I love it for its high variegation, and I thought that all Jose Buonos had pretty much the same amount of high variegation, but my mom also has one, and she was telling me that hers does not have the same amount of variegation as mine. If you have a highly variegated specimen, it's going to give you these very whitish leaves, and then as it hardens off, the leaves will become this minty green color. Mine had grown quite big, really big, and then one day I just took a cutter and I just snipped it, stuck it back into here. I don't even think I let it callus off or anything like that. Since then, it finished pushing out this leaf, which is what it was pushing out at the time. And so the next leaf, obviously, because it just went through a gigantic cut, the next leaf wasn't as big as the one before it. But anyways, since then, it's finished this leaf, pushed out this one, and then it's starting to size up again. And so it's pushed out these 2 new leaves since I've cut it. So again, this is the top cut. And this leaf, I guess, was sort of like the sacrificial leaf because, you know, it's gone. And I may have slightly not kept the medium damp enough to keep this leaf going, but I'm just gonna leave it here for now. It's okay. This is this bad boy, still doing well. I've got it in a self-watering pot just because I feel like self-watering will help this plant to grow even faster because it's so fast, it's so thirsty. I don't want it to get underwatered because these leaves are quite delicate. So I feel like the Jose Buono's leaves are a little bit more delicate, are they? Yeah, they just feel a little bit softer and easier to damage than the Ring of Fire. Very similar, but if I had to pick one that I felt like was a little bit more delicate, I think the Jose Buonos, they are so soft. I want to keep it in self-watering until it outgrows this. I think I will always want a version of this plant in my collection, even if it's just a baby version, because it is a beautiful plant. And once it starts to mature, I find the leaves look even better. They look smoother and glossier. Because if you notice, these leaves, they look a little bit different, a little bit smoother and glossier than these leaves up top, which is from the base plant. So they're not from the more mature top cuttings. So as you can see here, they're just a little bit different. It's growing here under the Sansi grow light. It's growing well, but not as fast as it used to grow. And I don't want to put the grow light any closer because, like I mentioned, philodendron leaves, they burn very easily, and the Sansi grow lights are actually quite hot. So I don't want them to physically damage the leaves. I think I may actually move it and put it next to my Barina standing light so my leaves can face forward instead of facing up. I might do that actually. Over here is my Philodendron Ring of Fire, a plant that I was so excited to get. I was determined to get this plant, and it is a beautiful plant. Let's talk about what I like about it. I love the unique leaves, and that's what I love about philodendron on a whole. I feel like before I knew a whole lot about plants, I was just buying what I liked, and when I started learning about genuses, etc., I couldn't believe that I had philodendron that looked so different from one another. I was shocked to find or to realize how differently one philodendron can look from the other. It's just so surprising and wonderful that they can just differ so much, and you can enjoy very similar types of plants, as in the care is quite similar, that enjoy very similar conditions but look very different between each one. So it doesn't look like you have this duplicates of different plants, like pothos have very similar care between them, but pothos pretty much look the same, right? Although there are different kinds of epipremnums, but I don't think they look as differently as how philodendrons can look from one another. So I really love the jagged leaves on this plant, the serrated leaves. And what I love most about it, which my plant doesn't have a whole lot of, is the beautiful variegation. So I got this plant when it was not harder to get, but when it wasn't as easily available as it is now. Selection definitely was not as wonderful as it is now. When I go plant shopping, I see the most beautiful ones. I think this is now down to like $15. I think when I got mine, they were like $30, like double the price. And the ones that I see now have the most beautiful like yellow variegation. It's not like the pale yellow of mine. They have this, intensely yellow. Oh my goodness, they've got some really beautiful specimen going around in circulation. Yes, I've been so tempted to get another one, but I think I'm just gonna, if anything, chop this one up and try to initiate more variegation in it. Very easy, very resilient philodendron, and I love it because it just adds a bit of a difference, this sort of crocodile teeth like look to my collection. It just helps to break up the possibly monotony of rounded or oval like leaves. I really appreciate that about it. One thing that I don't like about this plant is that it is very tippy. So it has very tight internodal spacing, which is great because then it could look very full, but because of that, it can get quite heavy because there are so many leaves in a small space, which weighs down the plant. So I sort of have to prop it up in the corner here, and I don't want to put it on a moss bowl because I don't think it needs a moss bowl. If anything, it might just need just a regular pole just to stick it up on. I put it into self-watering because I do think this is quite a thirsty plant, and I just wanted to encourage it to grow a little bit faster. But I think I might take it out of self-watering and use this pot for something else, because the height of the self-watering pot is making it even taller and harder to place in my collection. But I think, just like the Selloum that I showed you before, I think this is a great plant once it's huge and mature, having a corner to fill out a space, and it is beautiful. I mean, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if I sold this and bought a new one, a small one with more variegation, because I really do love this plant. I just think that I want one with more variegation. But apart from that, it's super easygoing. Mine has taken a couple tumbles between my son and my cats, and so I've lost a few leaves, so it's not as full as it can look, but it's a fantastic plant. No direct sunlight for this one, but very bright light, and it will grow quickly for you. And I think it's trying to bloom here. I probably should chop this off right here because it's slowing down the growth of this leaf that it's trying to push out. But yeah, I'm proud of it. It shows that it's really happy trying to bloom there. That's what it looks like. And this has 2 plants in it, which will again make it hard for me to sell, because usually when you get it, there's just one. But now there are 2 plants. So I have another one here, a baby one. See if I can get the camera. Here we go, right here. So also the leaves are delicate. Many times I will accidentally hit it and the leaves will get snagged. And so I do feel like the leaves of this is not as pretty as maybe the white wizard. I would say they're like low medium. Low is a strong word, but maybe they're a true medium. They're true medium because when you get into the higher light, you start to get the bleaching, like you can see on this leaf here. So again, it's not one of these plants that I would say, you know, everyone says bright indirect, but it can handle direct light. I will say that with Hoya. Like I think most Hoya can handle direct light. I don't think I would put my philodendron in direct light. They're definitely a bit thinner leaved and not as capable in handling the direct light. This planty corner hasn't made its debut on my channel as yet, so it's a little bit new, but we'll have a whole video. It'll have its time when we're gonna debut this area. It's not finished yet, so work with me. The next plant on the list is my Philodendron Lemon Lime, and this plant is in my entryway. You saw it recently with my, I think it's my low light houseplant video. So I'm not able to film underneath it, so I'll just put a little bit of B-roll. But the Philodendron Lemon Lime is another one of my favorite philodendron, and I love it so much I contemplated getting another one to put in a different part of my home. The thing is stunning. The leaves, I don't want to say they look like they're velvet leaves, because they're not velvet leaves, but they feel like they're velvet. I can't explain it. The texture on the leaves, they're so soft. They're so pillow soft, and they're so plump, and they're a little bit, they've got this little like very dome-like effect on them. Like pothos leaves are quite flat and a little bit more taco-like. These leaves are a little bit more curved, just a little bit more, and the plant is stunning. It's simply beautiful. I love it. I love the color. I love how it grows. I love the rate at which it grows. It is a fast growing plant in my opinion, even if mine is not super fast, but it's because mine is in a north facing window, which is a window that gets the least amount of light in my space. It's still growing beautifully in that window. A little bit thirsty because I do find it uses up water quite quickly for where it is. Again, you'll notice a pattern, a theme here with philodendron. They tend to be on the thirstier side, but overall it's a great plant. I love it. If you're thinking of getting one, 10 out of 10. I recommend it. A flat out beautiful plant. If you have bright light or low light, it doesn't matter. It grows very well. A very full version of this plant is gorgeous, and I recommend it. I can't there's so much. I just love it. But if you'd like a little bit more detail as to how I grow mine, where it is, why it's there, etc., check out my low light hanging plants video, because I really go into a little bit more detail with that plant and where I have it and why I grow it there and the care I give it there, etc. A brand new philodendron, and I'm excited to share it with you. This is my Philodendron Micans. I know, once again, I'm late to the show, but I always just like to make sure that I like something and I'm not getting it because of hype, because I just feel like I'll appreciate it so much more. Honestly, I remember, we all know this used to be a very popular plant at one point, and it probably still is. I saw it everywhere. I wasn't in love with it when I saw it in others' collections a few years ago when it was everywhere. It just always looked a bit finicky to me. I just found a lot of people were complaining about it, and so I wasn't very attracted to it at the time. But since I've gotten the Philodendron Verrucosum, the Philodendron El Choco Red, I started to fall in love with the velvet leaves. And so this was actually on my wish list for the year of 2025. I know I haven't released a wish list video yet. I'm not sure if I will, but when I went to a recent plant shopping sale, if you haven't checked out that video, you may want to. Basically, one of my favorite nurseries has its annual plant sale happening right now. I was able to get this plant for 10% off when I went to pick it up from the sale. It was originally $25 and I got 10% off this price. And I have a video coming out soon of the process of me choosing this one and what the selection was at the time. So subscribe and stay tuned if you're interested in seeing that video. I have not unpotted it. So this sale, I went to the sale on Friday. Today is now Wednesday. So it is still in its current setup, but it has been completely isolated. If you've been here before, you already know what I do when new plants come into my collection. They get isolated, they get completely repotted, they get sprayed down, they get quarantined, they get a thorough inspection. So I just haven't had a chance to do that inspection as yet. And I also wanted to show it here when it's nice and fresh looking from the nursery before I go tampering, and I'm not sure what's gonna happen because I've never had this plant before. So I honestly cannot share any tips with you about how to care for this plant because it is brand new to my collection, other than bright indirect light, water when top 2 to 3 inches of soil is dry. Hope that's helpful. But honestly, I have a strong feeling that it could be either like my Philodendron Lemon Lime, which is really easygoing and happy, or it could be like my Philodendron Brazil, which is also easygoing when it's established and set up. Doesn't like to be repotted. So I'm leaning toward it being closer to the Philodendron Brazil. I'd rather err on the side of caution. If you have any tips on what helps you to grow this plant beautifully, any observations about how this plant has grown in your collection and you've had success with it, please share it with all of us in the comment section below. I really do appreciate it. I work hard to give tips to you, and I actually really enjoy getting tips from you, and I've had a lot of success with a lot of my plants based on a lot of your tips. Please, and thank you in advance. All my other plants already know that this is my favorite philodendron in my collection. It's not a secret. We've all just accepted it. They're okay with it because it is clear that this plant is a beauty. And this is my Philodendron Florida Beauty. I'm gonna try not to say absolutely stunning over and over like I said for my 2024 favorite houseplants video. And it's taking a lot out of me, but this plant is stunning. I love it. I love it. Now, before I got this plant, I was super scared about getting it because a lot of videos, or maybe, I don't know, I can't remember who or what I was watching, were talking about how difficult this plant is. I just have not had that experience with this plant. I think the only thing that, if anything, is worth mentioning is just that if you give it too much of high humidity, it will sort of melt the leaves right here. But I think that's it. Or I guess if you overwater it, but I think it was too close to the humidifier right there. Apart from that, this plant is easy. I dare say it is easy. And I've said it all that needs to be said in that favorites video. I don't think there's anything new for me to say except for the poll. But this plant, if you're gonna get one, find one with lots of variegation. I have heard that it reverts easily, and I can see that that's true too, because I thought I was giving it a little too much light, and I've said this before, I pulled it away from the light a little bit and we got this really green leaf. I pushed it back into the light and then it got this nicer leaf, but then the latest leaf here, this was after I put it on a moss pole and did I repot it? Yes, repot it and put it on a moss pole, and this leaf is a little less variegated than the one before it. So that's the one thing that I would say, if you're going to get one of these, invest in a beautiful cutting. Like I saw on Facebook Marketplace, people would have cuttings looking along the lines of, maybe along the lines of this, or even this leaf saying Florida Beauty, and would charge lots of money for it. Just don't. Just hang in there, wait it out, and get a beautiful specimen that will give you some fantastic plants, and then give them high amounts of light. They're very sensitive to light. Again, no direct light. These very soft, very soft thin leaves will burn quite easily. So anyways, I've put mine on a moss pole because I am determined to have mine grow up on a pole, and it's in this cabinet here. I just put it in here last night, so I don't have a lot to say about how it's growing in this cabinet. Outside of that, it was in ambient conditions, and I'm trying my best to have the grow light pointed face on so that it can, well, straight forward or straight ahead, so that all the leaves can grow facing forward. So since I've done that, this is the first leaf that has grown facing forward. Soon I plan on cutting it either at this leaf here. So whenever you're going to cut a plant, because the variegation has sort of lost the strength that you wanted, always cut above the most variegated leaf, or your last most variegated leaf. So that's this one. So I'm going to cut it here, and like I've said before, sometimes I let the cutting callus over for a couple of hours, but I usually just stick my plants right back in the soil, and they're just fine. And then I'm going to attach it to the pole and let it grow up the pole. This is in a combination of Molly's Aeroid mix, so a mix I use for plants that make me nervous. And when I repotted it, I added my own mix to it, which is just like a DIY chunky aeroid mix. So there's no soil in this, just a chunky mix. And that's it. I fertilize all my plants every single time I water them. There is no schedule with that. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all I have to say about this plant. And pests, I have not experienced any pests on any of my philodendrons other than my Philodendron Selloum. I regularly treat my plants whether I see pests or not, to try to keep them at bay, and I have an entire video of what I do to keep pests out of my collection. The worst pest that I've known that I've had is spider mites. I don't think I've ever had thrips. I've never seen mealybugs. It came in on a plant that I had in a Ziploc bag, and that got tossed. And I've never seen quite anything else. So yeah, check out that video if you want to know some more, but that's this one. Going down the list of plants, here's a philodendron that you may recognize. It used to be a lot longer, and I've chopped it up and stuck it back in here. This is my Philodendron White Wizard. This is my favorite philodendron of its kind. So the White Princess, Pink Princess, White Wizard, all the princesses. It has these very paddle-like leaves, these very wide paddle-like leaves, and I adore the lovely white variegation that this plant can produce, especially if you find yourself an amazing specimen with lots of variegation. And if you're looking to get variegated plants, a great way to know how good or how variegated your plant is not only by the leaves, but if you look at the stem of the plant, you'll get to see how much variegation is inside of the plant itself. And when you see lots of whatever color it is you want, that's a great indication of how variegated the plant is. It's quite generous with the variegation, and it's very easy to initiate. Bright amount of light and it will give you that variegation nicely. I do think this philodendron is quite thirsty, and when you let it dry out just a little bit too much, and it's hard to know because it's not one that gives you crispy leaf. If this philodendron gives you a crispy leaf, you've gone way too far. But this one, I've noticed it will start to droop a little bit. So I let this dry out just a little bit too much recently. And if you notice this leaf here, some of the leaves, they look a little bit droopy. I watered it and it still has not perked back up yet. So it's not that I think there's any rot, but very similar to the ficus, which is a reason why I likened it to a ficus. When ficus leaves are allowed to get too dehydrated, or the plant, not the leaves, they will droop, and sometimes they will never get that. They'll never recover the sort of, I don't know, the height. They'll never go back up the way they used to be. I think that's the case with this plant. So the bottom leaves will look this way, but I'm not scared at all because I know it's going to grow up and the new leaves will look very nice. How do you know when to water this plant? I typically know when to water it by lifting the, I think they call it the weighing method. I lift the pot. That's how I know. And I also know because this plant is so thirsty that I know, like when it gets to about a week or so, I know that it's ready to be watered. It also isn't easy to overwater this plant or a lot of other philodendron. I know this is a very bold thing to say on the internet, but with philodendron, I find overwatering is not as much of a factor. I'm not so as scared of overwatering a philodendron as I am with overwatering a Monstera adansonii. I just feel like they're much more thirsty, and so they can handle a little extra water a lot better than some other plants. But again, this is not me saying water your plant every 2 days. No. You still need to eye your plant, know how much light it's getting, and so that can help you to know how frequently you need to water it. It's really an intuitive thing. My Philodendron Florida Beauty better watch out because this one is very close to taking its throne as my most favorite philodendron, and this is my Philodendron Verrucosum. It is, I'll not say too much because I've featured this plant quite a few times on my channel in the past, 2-3 months or so, 2 months. So I'm not gonna say too much. If you wanna see me caring for this, I will link the videos down below. I've had it since when it was just a few leaves. I love it because of the thing that once used to frighten me, which were fuzzy petioles and redbacks. These were things, well, not the redbacks, but the fuzzy petioles used to frighten me because I used to worry that pests would hide in there. So far, that has not happened for me. The Philodendron Verrucosum, for me, has been very easy. I can see how people would say that this can be difficult. I can see the opportunity for it to be difficult. It's a philodendron that does not like to dry out. It likes to stay consistently moist. I wouldn't call this plant hardy. I wouldn't say that you can neglect it. It doesn't handle neglect very well like a lot of my other philodendron, like my Ring of Fire. It doesn't handle that very well. So this is a philodendron you definitely need to baby and coddle a little bit more in order for it to look healthy for you. Mine, of course, looks less than healthy, but if you watch my videos regularly, first of all, thank you. And secondly, you would know that I recently cut it. So it used to be so much bigger, so much taller than this, and well, not bigger, so much longer than this, because this plant has very wide internodal spaces. Definitely not one of these plants that will branch out easily on its own. So like I mentioned, I chopped it and I stuck 2 of the cuttings back in here. Well, I stuck 3 of the cuttings back in here. So this is a little bit of an update again on how it's been since I've done that. So let's start at the top. If you look here, you will see that some new growth is coming out wonderfully. I'm just waiting for it to get a little bit bigger, and then I'm gonna pin it here against the pole so that the adventitious roots that are sticking out can go into the pole and become a bit more established. And then if we look another further down, it's starting to push out another growth point here. I stuck 3 pieces back in here just to test, just to see if it will grow, because the Verrucosum is a little bit more sensitive. I wasn't sure if it would grow well just this way or not, but I felt more on the yes than no. So anyways, I stuck one of the pieces I stuck in here. It has started to grow and it's pushing out some new roots right here. The other one, put it into water, and honestly, it has not started pushing out roots as much as this one. This has way more roots than the one that's in water. And then I have another one here. The other piece that I have cutting that I have here is doing well. Actually, no, I have 4 cuttings in total. So this is another one. I don't see any roots for this one as yet. And then the one in the middle, which you can see, this is also a cutting that I've stuck in here. No roots as yet for this one that I can see. That's at near the front of the pot for me to see. There may be roots further in. So how am I growing this? So I've mentioned this before. Sphagnum moss keeps the hydration more balanced than soil. And then I just top water, pour it over like coffee to make sure that the sphagnum is moist again. And then I refill my reservoir up to where the sphagnum moss meets the leca. Do I flush this? Absolutely not. I don't think Verrucosum like their roots to be touched. They seem to have a very delicate root system. So I'm not touching these roots at all. It seems to be doing really well. I have roots into the moss pole here, and it's a good idea to keep this moss pole moist. I think this plant doesn't need higher humidity, but I think it would enjoy higher humidity. I also think it is a bit thirstier. So I find that it loses water from these very thin leaves quite easily. For a plant with such a delicate fine root system, I just thought that it would use water slowly. But yeah, that is pretty much the summary of my care for this Verrucosum, and I hope that it eventually will fill out and prosper a little bit more. And I don't think it's one you should be scared of, especially now that it's getting more mainstream. You're starting to find it in nurseries. I think I saw someone found it at Home Depot recently. It was at one of my nurseries. So I definitely think if you're tempted to get this plant, I think now is a great time, because if you lose it, it's easier to get a new one now. Okay, so we've got another one that I'm very proud to display because I'm treating it a lot better now. I've put some work into it, almost. And this is my Philodendron El Choco Red. And it's one of these plants that it just looks so much better on camera. Like, it's making me look like a way better of a plant parent than I really am. Mid-2024, I decided I wanted to give these philodendron a try. For starters, what I like about it is the neon, the fuchsia-like green in the leaves here. I'm just looking at this leaf, it's a little dry. And then I love the red backs that they have when they are juvenile. Apparently, when they get more mature, they lose those red backs. And I think if I had known this, I would not have bought it, because what I love about it is the contrast between the fuchsia velvety leaves and the red backs. But I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there, and we'll see how I feel about it. I've honestly neglected this plant for the majority of time that I've had. So originally when I got it, I put it in a arid mix that was just way too chunky, because for some reason I was just extremely worried about overwatering this plant. I don't know where I got the concept that this plant is easily overwatered. This plant is the opposite. It's quite thirsty. And I had that suspicion, but I wasn't quite sure, and I wasn't brave enough to test my theory by watering it more. And then I had a viewer, a lot of you save my plants, like, thank you so much. A viewer commented that her El Choco is quite thirsty. And I thought, okay, that makes sense, because I felt like mine was quite thirsty, like so thirsty, like new leaves would come out and won't unfurl because they were so terribly underwatered. Like, I honestly did not do this plant right. Since then, I have repotted it. I have put it into a 6-inch pot. So I sized it up a little bit because I wanted to not only add a moss bowl, but I wanted to make the soil a little bit, the mix a little bit more water retentive. So I added soil, something I don't do a whole lot, but that's to show you how thirsty this plant is. I just had to add a little bit of soil to the mix. So I would say it's about 25% soil and 75% of my regular soilless potting mix, like my aroid mix. And yes, I've sort of did it halfway and I didn't put sphagnum moss inside. Sometimes when I do my chores, I'm so tired. I just want to do what I can in the moment and leave whatever I can do later for later. So that's basically what happened. And I know a lot of you may be in that situation too sometimes. Typically, plants that are this level of thirst, I will put them in self-watering pots. But like I mentioned with my Ring of Fire, I'm starting to now take those very thirsty plants out of self-watering and I'm going to start to manually water them again. Just because with the self-watering, it just makes them so tall and the roots outgrow the pots so quickly, and I don't want to have to buy self-watering pots every single time to up pot my philodendron, since self-watering pots are typically more expensive than these just clear pots. I have it in this cabinet, not because it needs higher humidity, but just because I have it grouped with plants that are on poles. The poles are drying out right now so painfully fast. I want to slow down this process as much as possible. So I'm trying to increase the humidity and reduce how much dry air these plants are exposed to. That's it, and I like it a lot more now that I've actually taken care of it. It looks a little bit more like hydrated and less crusty. I'm proud of myself. The plants just need water. Just water the plants, people. Just water them. I wouldn't say that every single plant can handle the exact same care. One plant that maybe is just a little bit more temperamental than the rest, and that I would say is the Philodendron Silver Sword. Not difficult. So I'm not saying that this is a difficult plant, but the care of it, for me, the ease of care is not as easy as the rest of the philodendron in my collection. First and foremost, this plant was a little bit hard to propagate. I thought it was just me, but I called my mom and she said the same thing. It's not that it is difficult. I think if you put it in water, it'll grow roots like a lot of other plants. They usually will do that quite easily. But with this plant, the transition from water into your medium, I think that's where you might struggle a little bit. Perlite, that's the only medium where it started to grow better and produce more leaves. But this is a very beautiful philodendron. It has these silver-like leaves, these silver leaves with a little bit of a bluish tinge to them. And on camera, it actually looks bluer than it does in person. In person, it looks, ooh, yeah. In person, it's a greenish silver, but on camera, the blue is really picking up a lot more. This plant, what I like about it is as it grows, it will size up beautifully for you. My mom has one. What's funny is that I got a couple cuttings from someone of this plant, and I started to, when mine started to grow a little bit, I gave my mom a couple small cuttings from mine, but hers has exploded and mine is still miniature. Obviously mine was way smaller because I just got a few cuttings, but still it goes to show that care is really important. I do lose a lot of leaves to underwatering, and I think that it's not as resilient or tolerant of underwatering as the rest of my philodendron. But honestly, that's just my experience. It could be that it's my medium that's too airy, so I don't think I'm giving it too much light. I think I'm not giving it enough water. It is in a very chunky mix because I wasn't quite sure how to water it, and so that explains a lot. It's due for a repotting soon, but I just wanted to share it on camera here with you before I repot it, just in case it goes south, which I don't think it will, but just in case it goes south, you could see it when it looks better, maybe the best it's ever looked in my collection. This plant is still doing amazingly for how much I've neglected it. Like I mentioned, for how much I've underwatered it and how much it's lived a big part sort of chucked away in this corner down here. Even when I removed all my grow lights from this area and repurposed them, it still survived on just the light coming in from the south facing window. No direct light, it just survived on the indirect light it was getting from this window. This is a troublesome little thing. This is my Philodendron Florida ghost. And you would think that this plant, well, I can't say you, I thought that this plant was going to be a little bit easier. Now it's a lot easier, but when I first got it, it was A, extremely small, and B, extremely finicky. I went to my nursery because they told me that there was Florida Beauty in stock. I went in, I got it, but they didn't say that they also had the Florida Ghost in stock, or was it the other way around? They had the Florida Ghost, but they didn't mention that they had the Beauty. I guess mentally I went in expecting to get this one, and then the Florida Beauty was there. And I was very surprised, so I got both. And honestly, I thought, from what I've heard about it online, from just the look of the plant, I thought the Beauty was going to be the more difficult of the two, but this one, long story short, is the most difficult, or was the most difficult of the two. When I got this, it was super tiny, so tiny. I'll see if I could get a clip from that video. So tiny. And it was growing. It actively was pushing out lots of new leaves. Whenever it grew a leaf, it would lose a leaf. So it will push out a new leaf, great, but then lose an old leaf, which to me isn't what I'm going for. You're not an alocasia. Like with alocasia, I'll allow it, barely. Not with a philodendron. No. Something needs to change. So I tried really hard, and many times I almost gave up on it. And what I really figured out is this plant needs bright light, which makes sense because especially when the new leaves are out, there's not a whole lot of green on these leaves. And so it needs more green in order to make food. And so with this plant, I think because it burns so easily, and speaking of burn, I had it a little bit too close to a grow light a few days ago, and this literally burnt in less than an hour. I just cut it off, and so it looks a lot better now. But it burns so easily because, again, philodendron can't handle too much intense light, but this one specifically needs bright light in order to photosynthesize. And so that's how this plant works. So I would say definitely keep it in a place that has consistent light. So I would definitely say either a couple feet back from a south facing window, or grow lights. Like this is one of the very few plants, no, not very few, but this is one of the plants in my collection that I would say grow under grow lights in any season from fall to spring, just because this needs such consistent light that if you just set it next to a window, but if you live where I live, that has more days, especially at this time of year, of dark days than sunny days, you're going to struggle with this plant. And this was summertime. I got this in summer, but I guess we had a couple weeks of lots of rain, and this plant didn't like it. We potted it. I think I have a video on that. I found a lot of rot, but I stuck it back in with Molly's aeroid mix, again, my tried and true, and it has been doing much better since then. Stuck it under grow lights, and we are good to go. With philodendron leaves, when they're unfurling, ne touche pas s'il vous plaît. Do not touch it, because they will get damaged and they do not heal. And I just thought I'd just help it, like, let me just help you. And that's what happened here. Eventually they harden off into green, but if you give it like bright enough light, it won't get too green. It will stay this lighter colored, like it won't get too green. Thank you for watching today's video. If you enjoyed this video, I have some suggestions that you might enjoy, and I'll see you next time. Bye.